Hi, everybody. My name is Sam Moss, and today I'll be talking to you about weighted implement training in baseball players. So, an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. First, we're going to talk about some background on the subject, exactly what is weighted implement training, and how we kind of get to it. From there, we're going to talk about my purpose statement and research questions. Then we'll be doing a little bit of a literature review on some themes that are present in the research that's already been done on weighted implement training. Then we'll be talking about my methods. And finally, we'll be doing some practical implications and possible future research. So just some background on the subject of weighted implement training. Weighted implement training is obviously a form of strength conditioning training. And in today's athletic culture, strength conditioning training is accepted as a method to increase athletic performance, and for a good reason. It's been proven to increase muscle strength and girth, proven to increase fast twitch muscle fiber cross-sectional areas, which allow an athlete to be more powerful and explosive. But as with anything else, athletes will respond different to strength conditioning programs. And usually that response is based upon an athlete's training age or the training phase that they're in. So we'll talk about the training ages and phase on the next slide, but just generally speaking, as an athlete's training age increases, they require more specialization work in order to continue to see training transfer over to their sport performance. So those training ages or training phases, the first is a novice. So this is essentially an athlete who's never been on a strength conditioning program before. They recover quickly from training sessions. They're able to make linear gains in speed, strength, and power just from general exercises such as bench or squat. And their transfer rate to their sport performance is high, basically because any well-structured development program is more beneficial than nothing at all. The next is advanced novice. So this is where the strength conditioning improvements might begin to slow a little bit just due to adaptations. So the body, now knows how to perform a squat or a bench properly. But usually just adding recovery days in this phase allows the athlete to continue to train at that novice level. From there, we get into the intermediate stages. So intermediate and elite intermediate. This is where, athletes start to recover slowly. That transfer rate over to sport begins to slow as well. Any improvements are extremely difficult to come by. And this is usually where, in introducing some specialization into development will help to facilitate, a continued training to sport transfer. So this is where, the thought is that hopefully the weighted implement training can kind of bridge that gap to, allow an athlete to continue to improve their sport performance. And the last is advanced. This is where, athletes start thinking in terms of years instead of months or weeks when it comes to their training. This stage isn't really related to this study because athletes that are required to perform a complex skill, such as throwing a baseball, generally never reach this stage. So a little bit about weighted implement training. As I mentioned before, it's an option to increase specialization in athletes' training program. So, when the general work that a novice was performing, stalls out in those intermediate stages, this is hopefully where weighted implement training can come in and can help the athlete to continue to improve their sport performance. So it's kind of popularized by Soviet Union track and field coaches. They had their field events use lighter and heavy implements in order to train for speed and power. So, they had their shot put throwers throwing, heavier implements and lighter implements to train for speed and power. So the lighter implements obviously train for speed because the body's able to move faster with the decreased weight. And then the heavier implements train for power because of the need for increased muscle force because of the increased weight. So for baseball weighted implement training, we're talking about heavier and lighter baseballs in order to increase throwing velocity and also heavier and lighter baseball bats in order to increase swing velocity. So my purpose statement, the purpose of this study is to determine the effect that weighted implement training has on a baseball player's throwing and swing velocity. And also this study will attempt to measure any interaction that occurs between throwing and swing velocity. It's usually very rare to see a player at the highest level have a slow, throwing velocity, but a fast swinging velocity, or vice versa. So it's generally thought or believed, that there is some overlap between throwing and swinging. As for what it is, we're not quite sure. But the thought process is that there is some overlap. So this study will, obviously attempt to measure that interaction. So research questions, pretty similar to the purpose statement, obviously. Can weighted implement training increase a baseball player's throwing and swing velocity? What, if any, interaction is there between being able to throw a baseball fast and hit a baseball far? So, does an increase in one equal an increase in the other? So measuring that interaction between the two. So a literature review, 3 themes in total. The first theme is, using over and underweighted baseball throwing programs in order to improve throwing velocity. Second theme, over and underweighted baseball bat programs in order to increase swing velocity. And the third is heavy bat and swing velocity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that third one when we get to it. So the first theme, throwing velocity. Multiple studies have shown significant increases in throwing velocity using over and underweighted baseballs. The majority of these studies were conducted with high school or college age baseball players. So, usually baseball players in that intermediate to elite intermediate stage. And the overweighted baseballs in these studies ranged anywhere from 7 to 17 ounces. So a regulation baseball is 5 ounces. So, slightly heavier to a significant increase in weight. And kind of just a side note on that, it's generally thought that, throwing overweighted baseballs is bad for the arm or will hurt your arm. But these studies reported no throwing arm injuries. So that kind of helps to debunk that myth. And the studies lasted anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks. The second theme is swing velocity. And studies have also shown that swinging under and overloaded baseball bats can increase swing velocity. So the majority of these studies have players swing 100 times 3 days a week for 6 weeks, and the ratio of 2 to 1. So 2 weighted implement swings, heavier or lighter, to 1 regular swing. And bat weight went as high as 100% increase for overweight training. So if the regulation bat weighed 30 ounces, then their overweight bat weighed 60 ounces. However, most were in a plus to minus 20% range from their regulation weight. And Duren reported an increase in swing velocity using weighted implements while performing dry swings. So a dry swing would be just swinging the baseball bat, not actually hitting a ball at all. So we can kind of conclude from that just the act of swinging a baseball bat is sport specific enough to elicit change. Third theme, baseball kind of has this tradition of warming up with extremely heavy bats before games or before at bats. So, you'll see guys in the on-deck circle before their at bats, throw a huge big weight on their bat and swing it to get warmed up. But the research on this topic has kind of shown that extremely heavy bats actually decrease swing velocity. So why? Not entirely sure, but it possibly tires out the muscles and alters swing mechanics. So from that, you can kind of prove Durene's recommendation that weighted implements should be within that plus minus 20 range from regulation weights. So the methods for my study, I'm going to be doing a quantitative study design. using weighted implements, obviously, to train throwing and swing velocity. So we're going to have 40 high school players and 40 collegiate players that we put on an 8-week program that requires 4 days a week of weighted implement training. So, possibly a schedule would look Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. They'll be split up into 4 different groups: control, throwing only, hitting only, and hitting and throwing. And players will test velocities using a radar gun and the regular implements, so a regular weighted bat and a regular weighted baseball at the beginning and end of the study to see if any increases occurred. So from there, the swinging velocity program, players will be using a 30-ounce regulation bat, a 33-ounce bat as their overweight bat, and a 27-ounce bat as their underweight bat. They'll be doing 150 swings on training days, 50 with each different bat. And the throwing velocity program, we'll be using Driveline Baseball's program. So Driveline Baseball is a company out in Seattle, Washington, and they have done extensive research and have a detailed throwing velocity program that includes under and overweight baseballs. I won't go into all the details of the program, but just a sample of one of the days at the beginning of their program, they have a player throw a regulation weighted 5-ounce baseball 4 total times. From there, they throw a 6-ounce overweight baseball 4 total times, and then from there they throw a 4-ounce underweight baseball 4 total times. And as you progress through the program, the weights start to increase and decrease. So you'll get all the way up to 7 ounces and as low as 3 ounces. And the number of throws also increases. So their program is online for free, so we'll be using their program. So players in the hitting only group will be doing just the swinging velocity program. Players in the throwing only group will be doing just the throwing velocity program. The players in the throwing and hitting group will be doing both the swinging and throwing velocity program. And then the players in the control group will simply be hitting and throwing just regulation weighted implements. So as I mentioned before, at the end we'll measure velocity again, measure throwing and swinging velocity, and then we'll use t-tests and a multiple regression to determine if the results were statistically significant and what, if any, interaction occurred. So just some practical implications and future research quick to wrap up. Obviously, practical implications from this study would be provide further evidence that weighted implement training is an effective training method for improving sport performance. We'd be able to apply this research to our off-season player development plans. So hopefully we can improve individual performance within the players. This leads to also an increase in team performance. Future research, there hasn't been a lot of studies done with youth participants just because of some safety concerns that are related to strength and conditioning programs in youth athletes, and also possibly look at some in-season weighted implement training. So all the studies have been done during the off season, during an athlete's off season period. So it'd be interesting to see what this implement training would do if it was done in season. With that, that's all I have. Thanks for listening.